Video 156. Beloved Lucia, her ancient lives be told, who was the late loving wife of Abhaya, Abhaya. This here is the ancient spirit tralaka. Greetings. Life on such a limiting world, such as the one you have here called Earth, can be so deeply challenging when two true soulmates have met and have really danced that walk of life together in soul relationship marriage. Not the marriage on paper, but the soul relationship of their beautiful times together. Yet, as the frail earth human shells in time fail in death and the releasing of the inner spirit, this is so devastating to even such deep loving soulmates when one experiences such a loss, that feeling of the world being ripped apart, twisted, turned, drowning in such levels of grief. The feeling of one's life as being ripped apart, like paper being fed through a hungry paper shredder. Now, the other day, I received a call from Abhaya, a longtime friend of Backtoconstition. He told me about his horrible recent loss of his uniquely beautiful soulmate, Lucia. I spoke about 15 minutes with him on the phone. Now, I had my Bluetooth on because I was driving in a car. Now, in closing, I offered through the ancient spirit here, tralaka, to do a video of the ancient lives of Lucia, a cross-section of videos to aid him in closure, and yet assure him her love has not left, for it is still on the spiritual levels. For in the true understandings of the living, multi-dimensional, multi-universe, there are no limitations and no true ends, but changes and rebirths and recombinations and new experiences in the countless my levels, frequencies, vibrations, dimensions of change and possibilities. Now, my friends, let us together go down this ancient winding trail of Lucia, to be able to experience her gains and lessons, her deepness of love, and her thrills of hobbies, some very unique, yet and very endearing to her very health and experiences. Now, it was back in the ancient of times, for Lucia would have 3 lives in a row living in the Lyra planetary system of planets. Now, in her youth, when she reached adulthood, she would be 9 foot 2 inches tall as she went into maturity. Though for her species, the coming to maturity age was 42 solar years old. So, which there was proper. Now, seeing this culture, this civilization she was on had this absolutely intense amount of learning. The youths were required. So it went in parallel with the age of maturity in understanding. Now, the Lyra system had only in that time, in that recent era, had been just starting the recovery from a very long onslaught of pains and miseries from long generations of planetary wars. This was against a race of lizardly beings whom were very much psychopaths, murdering, rage-cultured creatures of destruction. They had no inner calmness within them, none at all. only rage and the consuming of other species' lives and technology. Now, that lizardly race in particular had no foreseeable calmness, which I have mentioned. However, there were so lack of creating, construction, and maintaining anything because they had no calmness within them to be able to be collective. When many times a species, when they become collective, they can begin starting to find some of that calmness so they can start creating their own stuff, constructing, maintaining technology and buildings which are their own because they made them instead of making others do it. But these lizardly beings here were true masters of keeping other races from being harmonized brotherhood of friendships so they could better use them as slave labor. Now, these beings averaged 12 feet 4.5 inches tall. Now, but this depends if they were standing fully tall and not leaned over at their usual 40 degrees fighting stance. They had two layers of scales, greenish scale in complexion, inner layer having larger scale. The outer layer was much smaller scales, which seemed to be overlying the broader scales underneath seams to make them more protective. Now, their head was much more bony structured than some of the other lizardly being species. Large, squeezed egg style of eyes, not really set into the skull, but more just around from the skull and the first curve of that more than 2 foot long outcropping of their snout. Now, this is very distracting. Should a being actually desire to look that close before they were likely to be about savagely killed, they would have noticed, wow, what a unique offset of eyes. How peculiar, how strange. But that outstretched snout had multiple rows of triangular teeth. They were not sharpened, but were part of their body's features by appearance. It seemed that there was 3 full rows of teeth. They were black. There was no shine to them at all, likely from thousands of generations of bad hygiene versus manipulation through gene splicing. Now, they had large feet with curved, large toes. The claws of them, the 2 inner placed claws on each foot, were longer and multi-jointed for climbing as well as holding down their prey. This species' arms were quite long. Now, once again, a part of their structure of body which appeared to be very much out of proportion compared to other lizardly being species. Now, they also had multiple joints on those 2 long arms. Their hands, now if you would call them hands, they were smaller, but 7 fingers with 6 claws which could retract from between the base of those fingers. Now, speaking for them, now in the local languages, well, yeah, but it was rare, for they rather use mind-sent fear impulsing. Once again, here showing the barbarian nature of their species, not looking to advance, but stay in a barbaric, savage rage. Now, he would send these impulses of fear thoughts through the air all around them to create shock and fear before they attacked. Though, please understand, when it came to intelligence for them, it was low. Because when you've traveled through the multi-dimensional, multi-universe, you become to understand that true intelligence and being a savage is very rarely seen together. Now, and so it was here for Lucia in the world she was at. Her surroundings on her home planet was strewn around with savagely destroyed buildings. Nearly all the cities all around the planet were savagely destroyed and needed to be removed because they were just so destroyed you couldn't rebuild them without starting from scratch. Now, for Lucia, who was very short for her age of youth in these sets of lives, it was also perfect for her because she loved the challenge, the excitement of the thought of understanding how to repair those huge, once beautiful buildings that had been melted down, how to clear that away and create something totally new in concept. But this is a whole planet thing. But she was so excited on the mere possibilities and how to rebuild. And then there's lots of theories, but it hadn't yet started. Now, her society she grew up with had only in recent solar decades at that time had the permission from the leaders, the scientists, that the surface was okay to come back up to because of the damage and their culture had for many generations had lived in structured cities beneath the surface, in spiraling downward tunnels, in parallel downshafts about 3 miles deep and about 20 miles apart. The planets, the planet here in application had a lot of inner heat and a very strong magnetic pull, which made it uncomfortable to go deeper for the construction of underground cities. Although very convenient, the strong magnetics had long ago been developed by them as they started to build those cities in those large spirals to be able to survive. And they developed the magnetics to use as heat shield as well as electricity. Now, here, Lucia, as we look down this lifetime, when she was growing up in that life, she really, her most favorite thing she enjoyed was the hobby of drifting, as it was called. Well, unless you were an old-timer, then you called it drafting. Here it was illegal in some of the cities. It was quite the in thing to do growing up. The heat updrafts during some parts of the solar weeks in those spiraled underground cities, that center shaft, the heat came up with the magnetics. Sometimes it was quite intense. And usually the youth, pretty universal, they're pretty creative, to find something to do. And the youths in this situation would craft their own drifting board from secretly acquired materials from old buildings they had snuck out on the surface to get. Now, Lucia had also acquired hers. Now, during a science school history trip to the surface some time back, in her mid-schooling years, hidden very carefully in her bedroom behind her data research desk. Now, for many, many months, she had stolen a solar hour or two at night when she thought her parents were sound asleep, slowly grooving and carving this board to properly contour it, filing it very, very carefully to allow for the most control in those strong, upswirling drafts of heat. For Lucia, this blend of secrecy and science with math was so perfect. She had been parts of the hidden cultures of youths doing small-scale drifting since she was just an infant. Although now here nearly 7 feet tall, she yearned for stealing away into the night with her own now done drafting board and doing the forbidding drift. Now, this was the main heat upshaft, just past the energy collector where the city created the magnetic electricity. This updraft was very powerful with the blend of magnetic waves and heat coming up the shaft from the planet, and could be very, very deadly. Lucia was now 36 solar years old, coming close to maturity. Though short, now 7 foot, actually 3 inches tall, as Lucia looked into the mirror of her bedroom, combing her somewhat shaggy, long black hair. Her eyes, near a mint green in color, soft yet piercing when she was in deep concentration. Humanoid, yet some Draco features. 4 slight rows of razor-thin bone pushing up against her skin just above her nose. 1 row of teeth, though some of her far relatives did have 2 rows of teeth. Now, she murmured as she brushed her hair for nearly a half a solar hour. 2 rows of teeth. Ha! That's far too many, she thought. Things forever will get caught between that many teeth. So much, just way too much time needed to brush and polish that many teeth. It's more important, she thought, to be looking good, with great hair and a firm, tight body, to look the most cool when drafting against the most experienced drafters late in the night. Now, Lucia's best friend, Shimley, had slipped a message to her during school that the updraft tonight was going to be the biggest in solar months, and rumors it would be strong enough, it would be big enough to fully open the vertical tunnel city's roof vents to the planet's surface for about 2 full solar hours. While this would keep the living conditions in that underground city well within comfort levels, here, though, for those secret drafters like Lucia and Shumley, this was intense with such excitement to prove their true talents in their hobby. Though Lucia very much enjoyed school and was very good in math and mechanical applicable conversions. Now, I will say this again. Mathematical applicable conversions. Important to remember, because remember, this civilization was rebuilding, but she also had to be good at cooking, history, stonecrafting, polishing, and design. She thought that all that stuff was for the old timers who were truly past their groove in life. Now, all this, though, was required for every child on that planet or within that planet to assure future generations, in case of yet another attack from who knows who else type of species, that their civilization would be able to survive because they had all learned how to be able to adapt the surrounding materials into usable creations for survival. For now, many males, this was pretty easy and boring sometimes. But for Lucia, this was as easy as breathing oxygen. Many times taunting her males in her class, as well as some of the upperclassmen, in true intellectual vocal teasing, which deeply displeased her parents. Well, now, more her mom was displeased than her dad, because Dad, seeing that character part of his daughter as being a driving means to assure she could do well in that mature part of her life on that world. Now, it was the late hour of 27. The planet had 29-hour day rotation. Now, this day and night was kept the same for generation in observation as their society had been required to live underground. So after the 23rd hour, the lights would be greatly diminished on the streets, not truly coming back in full until the first next day hours of 5 a.m. Now, Shumli had hacked into she was a mischief maker, wasn't she? She had hacked into the city mainframe computer to list this super advisory deep warning that night about the heat and magnetic updrafts. Now, these type of warnings, though not that unusual, though somebody had added this additional warnings inside of the mainframe, the computer city message, which will go out to everybody, would be sure that the parents were keeping much closer care and overlooking where their children was, and so they wouldn't go out any place near those shafts. So funny. Shumli thought as she waited down the city block from Lucia's home, leaning up against a lighted pole. In the late night, Shumli was tall for her age, 8 foot 5 inches tall, with shorter, mid-black hair, very straight, yet she here had grayish eyes. Though in weight proportions, she could have lost a few pounds on her legs. Now, she was dressed in this long flowing dress, ripples of peekaboos cut in the sides and deep in the back of the legs, a black back collar flowing up behind her neck, resting across her shoulders, with sound speakers that had been built in to that thick formed collar. Now, with this heavy rocking melody of music flowing around her as that slow heat breeze traveled around her as she waited. Behind her was the drafting board, hard to see because of the dim lights, if one would have walked down that street at this late part of the night. Lucia, she jumps out of bed. Her meditative-induced power sleep had been so useful. She was very pleased about this, though now it was time for action. Tonight was hers. Tonight she would truly master. She was ready. The big updraft, because second place is for old-timers, she teased. Under her mattress was her latest outfit she had designed to aid in the best drafting and conditions. Slipping this on remarkable outfit, this was truly different, and truly showing a rebel influence. And she slipped then on an over gown to hide it at the time, sliding her drafting board from behind the research desk, opening the bedroom door. She creeped down the hallway, glad her parents' bedroom was on the other side of the house, on the other side of the home's air exchanger, which had this weird buzzy late night sound when everything but it had been turned off for the night. See, right here it's showing a culture, even though they've had to go underground, that they're thinking about conservation of energy so everybody has enough without question. Now, the exit door of that home was very quiet as it opened, and she was very happy. Her excitement had her heart pounding against her ample chest. She tried to take half breaths to keep quiet. Click! The hall light turned on. Lucia turned, thinking she had made this horrible error. But the light switch, she remembered, was on the other end of the hall. Uh-oh! She turned, she saw her father at 9'10" and 1/8 inches tall, standing at the far end of the hall. Lucia was seemingly frozen in time and scared yet curious at all the same time. Her eyes were super wide open. Her father, Lucia's father, walked very softly for someone truly of his size in a quiet night, quietly walking forward, one arm behind his back, a very stern look on his face. Now, Lucia was now seemingly totally paralyzed in this bizarre, fake fear, which really puzzled her. Her father now standing next to her, looking down at her. He whispered, "Your sneaking down hallways needs a lot of work. You could wake up a concrete brick under a mountain of waste. You step so hard. Please, my daughter, stop walking using your heels. Use the toes and the ball of the foot to absorb the weight so you can walk like water sliding on the flat stone in a still breeze. Could you do that?" Her father moved his arm from behind his back, producing the tight lace grip form shoes. Lucia was puzzled. Then, looking down at her feet, suddenly she realized that her feet were still bare. Lucy blushed. Her dad easily saw, and he laughed. "You will need to use these, my little girl." Lucia, her jaw dropped, and struggled for any type of words. Her father leaned down to whisper in her left ear, "Sweetie girl, you're losing time. Put those damn shoes on and get out and catch the draft. And please carve out that destiny you've been desiring." Lucy stammered, which was so rare for her. "Dad? Dad?" As she grabbed the shoes and then went down to lace them up on her feet. "Ha ha ha," Dad whispered. "Did you ever take the time to figure out over these years why you always had the right tools to carve and design and build your drafting board, which you borrowed all this equipment from my hobby room chest and supplies?" Lisa shrugged and hugged her dad for a very brief solar second, then grabbed the board and out she was very quickly. Moments later, very fastly jogging down the dark side of the street with board at her side. Sumli was where she should be, not taking time to talk, no time for socializing, they thought. They both ran down that utility maintenance alley near the street corner. Breaking into a full run, they covered so much territory quickly because neither of those boards were heavy, because they were contoured, they were curved, they were cultured. Now, 15 solar minutes at a full run, pretty remarkable. Both Lucia and Sumli were near the heavy tall fence, looking carefully around to the left, to the right, behind them. Neither one of them saw any security. Sumli went to that bushy Drana plant, which was nearly 10 feet tall and a little more than half of that in diameter. It was a very unique plant. It was designed to be able to grow indoors as fervent as one had done outside in the normal environment. Now, sweeping the dirt away from one end, uncovering a long hint. On the other end, at the same time, Lucia had revealed a latch and had pulled it upwards. The door that Bush was on, rather the Bush's base planet box was fastened to. So both girls then leaped with their boards 15 feet straight down through the hole, and that door with that plant slammed back down over, and dirt drifting over the hinges, covering it back up. Lucia was standing up now, board in hand, as Sumli adjusted her sound of music again in her collar. This was the maintenance walkways now, used by the workers to manually trim the energy levels being collected. Now, this walkway had no fences lining against that drafting, but this drafting, with the magnetics was like a fence all by itself. Up about a quarter of a mile they ran once again, though this was a little slow. It was more of a jog. The sounds of the heat magnetic winds getting louder and louder. Now, this location, Lucia thought, was perfect. She would be able to run full speed off the ledge with the board. Lucia knew at full speed she would be able to catch the main heat winds updraft and have just about enough time needed to adjust for the upcoming magnetic waves within. Now, Sumli stopped, pondering just short of the edge, once again adjusting the music for a heavier bead of rock music, this pounding sound coming from her collar, which she loved so much, and she adjusted again and again. This took another half a minute. Finally, Lucia came to and stopped before the ledge. Sumli turned around her, smiling. "Thought you were going to keep up with me. Ha ha! Keep this up and you'll end up being my bitch." Lucia frowned. "Well, we'll see who's going to be bitching once we see who the true masters of the drafting is. I thought you had a loud setting on that collar music device." This momentarily angered Sumli before she laughed. "Ha! Oh, where's your collar? Oh, yeah, hey, this is mine. You don't have one," as she wrinkled her nose in her laugh, directly looking towards Lucia. Lucia smiled, taking the sleek covering off her board, then tucking it into this little tight cavity in the corner back side of the board, and closed it within. Unique. The near top of the board had multicolored pressure switch flush mounted foot buttons. Lucia tapped on one of them, and the whole board came alive, like being in the front row at a huge concert. Deafening, yet very clear, quality sound of music with a very heavy rock beat pounding inside of it. Sumli growled and bared her teeth a bit. Lucia chuckled again, then grabbed the board tightly and ran full speed right off the edge of the walkway. Downward she fell for about 10 seconds, pummeling, giving her time to straighten the board, and then she showed off by backflipping onto it, then fastening her shoes on to that board in specific spots, holding tightly to certain textured spot on the boards, yelling upwards, "Hey, little girl, it's bitch time, or you gotta color your nails first, little girl." Sumi frowned, growled again, then ran fast, far out into the heat magnetic draft, waiting even longer period of time in her pummeling downwards before righting and mounting her board and shooting her back upwards toward Lucia. Now, these nights of the larger updrafts of heat magnetic winds were hotter than normal. Not really unusual, though tonight would be challenging. Lucia had stabilized her board, and riding back and forth across this vast upcoming stream, the music heavily streaming from her board under her feet. She removed her outer cloth layer I had described of this layered robe. Under was her own design, very tightly body-fitting, rippling in different areas, from her fingers to her end of her arms, to her neck to the waist to her shoes, from her neck down her back, then down to her feet. Now, she had designed these ripples under this sleek fabric used. The fabric itself was used by the warriors to be able to keep most of the knife cuts from hand-to-hand combat to a very bare minimum. So it's extremely durable material. But these ripples were there to help stream better that heat from the body as she go through the updraft, to be able to pull that heat away from the body better while giving you more stability. However, she would have added more to it, but, well, Lucia is Lucia. However, she had added burn-free, long fake leather fringes to the ripples on her back and the back of legs and arms for showmanship. This here was a little teasing for between her and Sumli. Now, her reflective, styled, heat-goggled, tight against her face eye protectors had this add on the edge, which came down from the center between the lenses to an inch under her nostrils to shield her inner nose and lungs from possible high heat updrafts. As a little thing she had humorously borrowed when she was acting like, "Oh, I'm just a little girl," when some of her father friends who had been warriors had come over years ago, and she kept. Now, at this time, the upper doors over the heat shaft were still closed, though keeping that draft speed down a bit was slowly causing the shaft heat temperatures to rise out of the comfort zone. Lucia and Sumli rode those updrafts for nearly 15 minutes. It would be Lucia, though, true riding the updrafts with precision, true artisan, getting more aggressive as the movements went on and the moments just seemed to just spill out and over. Just time had no meaning. But the magnetics inside the heat shaft had gotten much stronger. The male children here would put high magnetic strips on their boards to dare those magnetic winds, to grab the boards for a greater challenge. Though this would slow the boards down greatly, it was these type of boards that the males used to use, which became highly illegal because of the deaths associated with that rebel age of male children. So boards with any high magnetics were very illegal to be seen with. Now here it was seconds later then. The draft stopped completely for about 10 seconds. Sumli let out this little of fear as she dropped downwards with her board, fighting to keep that board level. Sumli crouched tightly down to the board in the very center to try to keep balanced. Now, 2 seconds later, just a mere 2 seconds, speeding past her downwards was Lucia, fully outstretched, arms out, yet leaning forward on her board, pitched downwards. The burn-free fake leather fringes on her back, her legs and arms, flowing wildly as she pummeled us by design down farther into the shaft. Her board now of Lucia's was even louder with its hard pounding rock music sounds. Lucia screamed as she passed Sumli on the way down. I'll leave a bitch application for you, Sumli, in your mailbox, little girl. Ha ha! Now, high above the city at this time, just to the left from the overhead doors for the heat updrafts, the evening crew monitor very carefully the control board's monitors. Now, during a break time, one of the crew asked out loud, "Hey, did anyone see that hacked message public information board?" One of the other beings answered, "Yes, I bet it was one of those crazy youths. Again, trying to get some private time drafting the upwinds. Well, I hope they are tonight only kidding. The coming updrafts in a few minutes are going to be very rough. The need to open the overhead doors quickly tonight we will need to do to protect the generators." One of them, in the meantime, had grabbed a set of thermal vision, high-powered binoculars, looking down over the edge through the glass deep into the pit below them. "Well, I will not make much out of that first claim, though, buddy. I have 2 thermal images diving deep down the hole," shaking his head. "Damn crazy kids. They will not likely survive this coming updraft," shaking his head. "Huh," one of them mumbled. "You said 2 of them?" He mumbled again. "This is crazy." "Yes," the one at the thermal binoculars stated. "One of them seems to be trying to pick up speed, going downwards. The other one, though, seems to be slowing down a bit." "Well, I'll put a 30-to-1 odds on the faster one against my next paycheck." "Ha! You're an idiot. There's a 4 in 12 chance of survival." Now, the planet for a millisecond hiccuped deep within, then released this great renewal of heated updraft with this greater magnetic flow within. Now, this could be felt both, this hiccup, by Sumli and Lucia. Both adjusted their body on their own boards. Lucia felt first that updraft, as she was much, much deeper down that hole than Sumli. Lucia flexed her whole body, stretching her muscles, her ligaments, and then began to draw her focus where that very center, so far ahead, the very center of that shaft where the overhead doors would be, the very center, because she was looking to do a very rare, for her age group of beings, to ride out of that shaft onto the planet's surface. Now, nearly everyone had always, all the children, all the way up into their 40s, had always dumped their boards to the side and rolled onto the upper observatory walkway, but yet still a ways underneath the closed doors to the side, and leave them walking away with a few bruises and a good story. Though Lucia said at that moment, "Ha! Tonight it's all the way, baby. Second place is for old-timers." Now, this updraft was large, and this one was very powerful coming up, and its power shot Lucia upwards as the winds brought her up to the slowing down Sumli, yelling out, "Hey, little girl, you're crazy!" As Sumli stabilized her board, beginning to warp more to the outside of the streams and to ride in a swirling manner upwards in the edges of that updraft. All right, the edges in this situation of those updrafts were much slower. They weren't tremulous; they were slower. Interestingly enough, more stable. Though Lucia knew that big updrafts had multiple speeds inside them, even in the big updrafts, to be able to ride. Lucia's outfit fringes getting warm and starting to smoke a bit, creating this unique, slight swirling motion of smoke around her as she rode that updraft wave. Lucia adjusted her legs again to achieve stability. She could maintain this for some time. She was comfortable now, and she rotated her hip just a little bit and narrowed her eyes to focus, looking upwards again. For only a few seconds, she saw the upper doors were actually starting to open. Round and around she rode that updraft. Not far beneath, Sumli was holding her own, though near the rock wall updrafts. This here was truly the best of life, Lucia thought. She took a soft stream of updrafts and this allowed her to go pummeling back downwards, past Sumli, who was coming to circle around her on the board. Sumli yelled, "There's a second draft coming up. Time to leave the stream, little girl," as she pointed, very largely pointing below her while she adjusted. Sumi wanted to roll off of that updraft onto the observation deck in a few seconds. "What?" Lucia, yet over the sound of the very large, loud winds and updraft and that incredibly loud rock music she had playing from her drafting board. What'd you say?" Sumi pointed down again frantically and then waved goodbye, and she went to exit the updraft. "What?" Lucia said again and shrugged her shoulders. Then, by incident, she looked down. Her eyes got big. "Uh-oh," Lucia yelled out. "Remember, my little bitch, second place is for old-timers. This is my night." Adjusting her body, Lucia did on the board. Just seconds later, doing this crazy idea of once again dipping down towards that great secondary updraft which was coming up with some outlaying orange swirls within. So we got some heat coming up here. It was just a bit hot for Lucia. Then she leaned into the fastest center updraft, just coming up underneath her, and she rocketed upwards. The ride upwards, Lucia kept in her tight form as she curved around and around in the swirling circles, this heavy beat of her favorite hard music playing even harder. The crew up in the control room had just left, which was just to the left side of the upper doors. They were just going into their break time, and so they're all looking with their thermal high-powered binoculars, leaning against the glass, and between them this much bigger pile of money cubes of bets was accumulating. Now, this was crazy. What is with this? What is with this drifter? She's crazy. She is off center. She's not going to hit the center stream to leave the shaft to the surface. She'll be dead in a few minutes. She's going to be crushed against the opening doors. A quick death, though. No pain. One of them replied. This one seems to be a math and science student. Notice how this one that we're watching changes between the different updraft streams to steady the ride. Picking up much too much speed to roll off to the observation deck, one of them mentioned. This one here is going for full ejection speed, out of the open shaft doors to the surface. I bet this one doesn't know that the high wind season has lately started. I'll double down on my first bet, one of them called out, but I'm going to change the bet that this one I'm going to bet will survive even the landing. While 5 others began calling out and betting against that surviving of the landing outside, while 2 of them still claimed that the draft rider would die, being slung incredible speeds against those opening doors. Meanwhile, the heat in the updraft got hotter. Lucia dipped one more crazy time downwards into the updraft. She was just going downwards, and she was just totally defying nature itself. This inside of her outfit was truly drenched in sweat, yet still in focus. She just bit down a little bit on one of her lips so she could focus better. She caught a swirl near the center, which was much stronger than she was used to in any of her past times. This one was like being shot out of a cannon. Up she shot, past the control room windows, which she had seen on her way up, as to the upper doors which had recently opened. And she thought, hey, look at them. I have an audience. Yeah. She gives them the thumbs up. The updraft by the doors, though, was much different as she shot up past them. Not stable at all. Likely something to do with the temperature of the doors versus the wind created a huge turbulence. Yet Lucia rode that updraft while striving to keep in the swirling upward manner of riding, up past the open doors into the dark early morning skies. Now the surface winds caught her very unexpected. She hadn't figured this part in. 160 plus mile an hour crosswinds 10 seconds later literally pushed her off of the updrafts that she had rode up from the underground city. Now, the ground was far below her, and she was on board, tumbling yet sideways through the air. She was frantically adjusting her body. 5 times she adjusted, and she very slowly slowed that tumble and righted onto the board again. Incredible, unique, very unusual. Now, she kicked hard the backside of her right foot hard into the board surface behind her. The sides of the boards opened up with full-length neon fiber wings, 14 feet on each side, hinged from the inner center actually, of her board, pulling the draft of her board up a little bit on the nose to ride smoother the winds. Lucia rode even these tough crosswinds down to the surface, her hair wringing wet as it blew furiously in the winds. The board skipped 9 times against the ground as she was landing. Near stopping, she jumped off the board and her feet dug into the ground, trying to slow down against those mercury moist ground. More than 120 yards she slid on that slippery surface before somewhat coming to a stop that seemed to be her standard of look. Now, she looked around and began laughing and crying to a bit. She had such joy. This excitement had been so incredible, just what she had needed. It was so intense, and yet she was shocked of the accomplishment. Now, after a few minutes of catching her breath, okay, it was more than a few minutes. It was probably more, as I saw, more of about a half an hour of slowing her breathing down. Then she looked around her. Way deep to her left, and then way to her right were both destroyed cities. She seemed to be in this slight lowland with this bright green grass, which was over a foot tall, very healthy looking. The first sun was starting to come up on the horizon at that time, she noticed, as she slowly walked back to the open updraft doors of the city she had shot out of. Lucia noticed other plants and trees in a way she had not really connected yet in her life, with all the schooling and the trips. She had never connected in that manner before. Yet, As she got near the security doors, she saw this growing number of observers who had come to watch. Mostly security, though some maintenance. One may have thought that in her life, when she got fully mature, Lucia in these life ancient times would have become a pilot in this application. Although this isn't what happened, because as the stream was looked down, the greatest joy she had was figuring out being part of the engineering crews for rebuilding a city from scratch, re-engineering, remolding it, redesigning it, but this time to truly utilize the different mannerisms of types of winds and magnetics from the planet to capture energy while utilizing nature in a harmonizing manner. This here is the ancient spirit tralaka. Remember, my friends, many lives, many adventures, many collective friends, and at the time, not so many friends in some situations. We have collected through our journeys through the multi-dimensional, multi-universe. Beings that may not have been a friend before, in time, through the great expanse of the complexity of time and no time, these beings can also become our friends, and we become an ally, and we can both journey forward into the oneness. Good night.